Before sunrise in Tunisia, a line of American Sherman tanks rolled into open ground. 51 machines crossed the sand near Sidi Bouzid. By night, 44 of them were gone. Not pushed back, not lightly damaged, burned. Black smoke climbed over the desert like a verdict on everything the United States Army thought it had learned about armored war. And the Germans believed they had just seen the truth. American courage, yes. American tanks, ordinary. American crews, not ready. But buried inside that disaster was a mistake Berlin did not recognize, because one Sherman did not burn. One Sherman was found nearly intact near Zweitla, engine usable, ammunition still aboard, its American crew gone in the panic. A German detachment climbed inside, turned it over, and the engine answered. Then someone chalked a warning on the hull. Do not strip this vehicle, reserved for high command. That order was supposed to protect a captured enemy tank. Instead, it protected evidence. Because that Sherman was about to travel hundreds of kilometers across bad North African roads in German hands, and nothing important broke. Not the transmission, not the tracks, not the engine. Not one of the things German mechanics were used to nursing back to life after every hard march. The tank was called War Daddy 2. To German soldiers in Tunisia, it looked like a prize. To the engineers at Kummersdorf, south of Berlin, it should have looked like an alarm bell. Because the most dangerous thing about the Sherman was not the gun. It was not the armor. It was not some secret steel formula hidden in the hull. The dangerous thing was this. It had been built by a country that understood the tank as part of a system. And Germany had built tanks as if every battlefield had a machine shop waiting behind it. To understand why that mattered, go back to February 1943. The American 1st Armored Division had trained hard before North Africa. They had practiced in the California desert, studied maps, memorized formations, and arrived overseas believing they were entering a war they could learn quickly. They were wrong. At dawn on February 14th, German armor came through the Fade and Maizila passes. The 10th Panzer Division and the 21st Panzer Division moved before the Americans fully understood the direction of the blow. Dust and broken visibility hid the attack until it was already inside the American position. Shermans counterattacked across open ground. German guns were waiting from hull-down positions. 88mm guns were dug into the earth. Panzer IVs sat low on the ridges. Stukas came overhead when the columns exposed themselves. The first 20 minutes decided the shape of the day. By evening, the American tank battalion that had started with 51 Shermans had almost ceased to exist as a fighting force. The larger disaster around Kasserine spread over the next days. The Americans lost men, guns, half-tracks, and tanks at a rate that stunned their commanders. German newspapers treated it as proof. The Wehrmacht had been right. The Americans could mass-produce equipment, but they did not understand armored war. That was the easy conclusion. It was also incomplete, because as German troops moved through the wreckage, they found a few Shermans that had not been knocked out at all. They had been abandoned. Green crews had been hit with artillery, dive bombers, smoke, screaming radios, and the sight of friendly tanks bursting open in front of them. Some climbed out, some ran. And one of the machines they left behind was driven away by the enemy. War Daddy 2 was not special because it survived. It was special because it allowed the Germans to test the thing they had been mocking from a distance. A German crew took it across rough roads towards Sfax. The drive took days. The terrain was punishing. Dust got everywhere. The roads were not roads in the way a European engineer imagined them. And still the tank kept moving. That detail matters. A vehicle can look ordinary in a duel. It can look unimpressive on paper. But a tank that can be captured, driven by men who did not build it, pushed across hundreds of kilometers, loaded onto rail, shipped to a proving ground, and still arrive ready for measurement. That tank is telling you something. At Kummersdorf, German engineers gave it a test vehicle number. They photographed it. They measured the armor. They examined the gun. They ran the engine. They pulled assemblies apart and compared them with parts from other captured Shermans. This was not admiration. This was procedure. A captured enemy machine had to be reduced to data. Thickness, angle, horsepower, traverse speed, ground pressure, wear, tolerance, failure point. And then the data began to behave strangely. An evaluator named Warner noted what he thought was a weakness. American manufacturing used loose tolerances. To a German engineering mind, that sounded like sloppiness. German vehicles were built through precision, fitting, machining, correction, and handwork. A component was not merely manufactured. It was made to belong. That produced beautiful machines. It also produced machines with a dangerous habit. Parts became married to the conditions of their own birth. A gearbox from one batch might need fitting. A housing might need adjustment. A component might match the drawing and still fight the tank it was supposed to save. Then Warner took parts from one Sherman and compared them with parts from another. Different factory, different state, different workers, different machining marks. Same fit. The pieces did not need persuasion. They did not need a master mechanic with a file. They did not need a day of careful adjustment in a depot. They went where they were supposed to go. Road wheels, track links, mounting points, transmission parts, turret hardware. The finish was not elegant. The philosophy was. America had not built the Sherman as a jewel. It had built it as a promise. A promise that a tank from Lima, Ohio could be repaired with a part from a factory hundreds of miles away. A promise that a 19-year-old mechanic who had fixed tractors before the war could keep the vehicle alive without waiting for a specialist. A promise that the tank did not have to be perfect if the system behind it was relentless. Then Warner looked deeper. Behind the driver's area, the Sherman carried an auxiliary power unit, a small gasoline engine connected to a generator. It could feed the electrical system without running the main engine. Radio, interior lights, turret systems, all of it could remain alive with less fuel, less heat, and less noise than a full engine idle. German tankers often sat inside cold steel boxes with the engine shut off and the turret reduced to hand power. American tankers had been given something simpler and more practical. Electric life when the main engine was silent. That was not glamorous. No propaganda poster would be built around it. But in a frozen field, in an ambush position, at night, or while waiting under blackout discipline, practical design becomes combat power. Then came the turret. The Sherman carried an electric hydraulic traverse system. If the commander saw a threat off to the side, the turret could swing quickly, even when the main engine was not screaming at combat speed. The gunner did not have to wrestle the entire mass of the weapon around by hand and hope the target waited. The turret answered. German crews knew what the opposite felt like. Some German tanks depended on engine speed for powered traverse. Some late-war vehicles lost powered traverse altogether as materials, production time, and electrical equipment became harder to spare. A tank can have a better gun and still lose seconds turning toward the target. And seconds inside armor are not decorative. Seconds are life. Mounted with the Sherman's gun system was another piece of American thinking that many crews did not fully exploit, but that revealed the same philosophy. The gyroscopic stabilizer. It did not magically allow perfect firing on the move. It did not turn an average gunner into a marksman. What it did was reduce the chaos. It kept the gun closer to level while the tank moved, so when the vehicle stopped, the gunner was not starting from a wildly bouncing barrel again. The pattern was the same. Not perfection, help, not elegance, forgiveness. The Sherman was full of decisions like that. A loader's space that could actually be used. A transmission that did not punish every imperfect shift. Controls that felt more like machinery built for tired human beings than machinery built to satisfy a drawing office. The German report did not need to say the humiliating part loudly. The facts said it. The Americans had built a tank that could be built everywhere, repaired everywhere, crewed quickly, and kept available. Germany had built tanks that could be magnificent when everything around them was already working. War does not give you that condition often, but Berlin did not want that lesson. In June 1943, the same captured Sherman was brought to a demonstration at Herlesheim. Albert Speer and armaments officials watched a staged comparison. The Sherman faced a new Panther on muddy ground. The American tank struggled on a slope. The Panther climbed. Cameras caught the image everyone wanted. German machine ascendant, American machine exposed. It was simple. It was visual. It was perfect propaganda. It was also the wrong test, because the camera could not photograph the thing that mattered most. It could not photograph the next 1,000 kilometers. It could not photograph the supply chain. It could not photograph a battalion clerk begging for final drives that were still in a bombed rail yard. It could not photograph a crew abandoning a nearly new tank because the transmission had failed and no recovery vehicle could reach it. 5 weeks after the Herlesheim demonstration, the Panther went to Kursk in numbers. On paper, it looked like the answer Germany needed. Sloped armor, long gun, heavy striking power, a machine designed to dominate the tank duel. But during the opening phase of the offensive, Panthers began dropping out faster than enemy fire could explain. Fuel systems leaked, engines caught, transmissions failed. Final drives broke under the stress of moving the tank that had been built around them. A battlefield can forgive a design flaw once. It will not forgive a philosophy built around ignoring it. The Panther's final drive problem became one of the most revealing failures of the German tank program. The vehicle asked too much from components that had not been given enough margin. As the war went on, Germany lost access to materials, time, skilled labor, safe rail lines, and recovery capacity. The machine became heavier than the system that had to support it, and when that happens, the battlefield does not care how fine the optics are. It does not care how clean the welds look. It does not care what the brochure promised. If the tank cannot move, it is no longer armor. It is a landmark. Meanwhile, the Sherman kept doing the boring thing. It arrived, it started, it accepted parts, it went back into line. That difference became impossible to hide by 1945. The clearest proof did not come from an American manual. It came from German tankers sitting inside captured American machines. January 1945. Alsace. The German army was no longer the army that had shocked Europe in 1940. Fuel was short. Factories were disrupted. Replacement vehicles arrived late or not at all. The Luftwaffe could no longer protect the roads the way it once had. Operation Nordwind was one of Germany's last attempts to regain initiative in the West. But many units entered it with a fraction of the armored strength their paper organization promised. Near Herlesheim, a young SS officer named Erwin Bachmann had only a handful of working Panthers. Not a full armored fist, a broken hand. He used what he had. Darkness, village streets, ambush positions, Panzerfaust teams hidden in buildings, engines cut so the American column would not hear them waiting. When Shermans from the U.S. 12th Armored Division entered the narrow streets, the trap closed. The lead tanks were hit, the columns stalled. In close urban confusion, training and courage were not enough to overcome surprise. Smoke blocked streets and armor burning only a few yards away. Bachmann's men captured prisoners, and in the village, they found something more valuable than a report. 12 usable Sherman tanks. 12. For a German unit starving for armor, that was not battlefield debris. That was a windfall. German crews climbed inside. These were not men who needed to be impressed easily. They had served in Panthers, Panzer IVs, and other German vehicles. They knew the strengths of their own machines and the punishments. They knew what it meant to baby a transmission. They knew how a turret could lag behind the commander's eyes. They knew the sound of a drivetrain beginning to betray them. Then they put their hands on the Sherman controls. The gear lever moved with a kind of automotive honesty. The synchromesh transmission did not demand the same ritual of double clutching under stress. The tank moved without argument. The turret traverse responded smoothly. The fighting compartment felt workable. The loader could function. The instruments made sense. The engine started in the cold. That sound mattered more than any lecture, because by January 1945, German tankers had heard too many engines fail to answer. They had seen too many Panthers immobilized by parts no one could replace in time. They had watched crews begin to lose faith in their own vehicles. The captured Shermans were painted with German crosses and used with minimal changes. That fact carries more weight than praise. When German forces captured some enemy vehicles, they often modified them, refitted them, changed radios, adjusted cupolas, reworked details to match German expectations. With the Shermans at Herlesheim, the essential machine did not need to be remade. It was usable, immediately. That was the nightmare inside Warner's old report. The enemy had built a weapon so coherent that even the enemy could operate it after capture. Bachmann's captured Shermans drove back through German lines. They kept running. Not one broke down on the way. And while those tanks were being put to use, German officials were reading numbers that showed the opposite story inside their own armored force. In early 1945, German production leaders and armored officials were forced to confront the scale of drivetrain failure. Hundreds of defective final drives across Panzer IVs, hundreds across Panthers, more across Tigers. The exact figures shifted by report and category, but the reality did not. A large share of German armor was being lost to mechanical failure before the enemy ever earned the kill. One German assessment stated the problem with brutal clarity. Orderly use of tanks was becoming impossible. The most important sentence was not about steel, it was about trust. Troops were abandoning vehicles because of mechanical failure, not because the tank had been penetrated, not because the crew had lost nerve under a direct hit, because the machine had taught them not to believe in it. Now hold that beside Herlesheim. German crews and captured Shermans, driving enemy tanks because the enemy tanks would run. That is not irony. That is judgment. The Sherman did not win the war alone. No tank did. But it represented the kind of war America had learned how to fight. An industrial war where availability mattered as much as armor. Repair speed mattered as much as muzzle velocity. Interchangeable parts mattered as much as engineering prestige. The United States built nearly 50,000 Shermans. Germany built far fewer Panthers and Tigers, and split its effort across different tank families with different parts, different support needs, and different failure habits. A German logistics officer trying to keep Panthers, Panzer IVs, and Tigers moving was not managing one machine. He was managing several mechanical worlds that competed for parts, fuel, recovery vehicles, rail space, and skilled hands. An American maintenance officer supporting Sherman's had a different problem. A hard problem, but a simpler one. The tanks were standardized. The components traveled in quantity. The assemblies could be swapped. Repair was not an afterthought. It was part of the weapon. The American 5-echelon repair system turned damage into a process instead of a death sentence. Crew-level fixes, company maintenance, battalion and regimental shops, division depots, rear area rebuild facilities. Each layer caught what the layer below could not. That system only works if the parts fit. A transmission does not help anyone if it arrives and requires a factory to make it belong. A final drive does not save a tank if the replacement is still trapped in a supply chain designed for handcrafted machines. The Sherman was built for that repair ladder from the start. It was not designed as the perfect tank. It was designed as the tank that could be returned. That is why a burned vehicle could sometimes reappear as a working vehicle. That is why a damaged assembly could be removed and replaced in hours instead of becoming a depot tragedy. That is why American armored units could lose vehicles at terrifying rates and still maintain high operational readiness. In the summer after D-Day, American armored columns did not simply outrun German tanks. They outran German repair reality. Patton's forces could move because the machines behind the spearhead kept being fed forward, fixed, replaced, and driven again. German units often had powerful tanks on paper and a smaller number available each morning. The gap compounded. A tank broken for one day is absent for one day. A tank waiting for parts for a week is a week of empty space in the line. A tank abandoned because recovery is impossible becomes a gift to the enemy or a burnt wreck beside the road. Reliability is not dramatic in a single scene. It is devastating over time. By the Ardennes Offensive in December 1944, the contrast was brutal. Germany concentrated some of its best remaining armor in a desperate thrust through winter forest. The opening shock was real. American units were hit hard. Roads jammed, towns fell, Bastogne was surrounded. But as the days passed, the repair systems beneath each army showed themselves. American crews worked in cold that froze fingers to metal. They pulled vehicles back, they swapped assemblies, they dragged damaged tanks into maintenance areas and pushed working tanks forward again. German armored units did not lack courage. They lacked time, fuel, parts, recovery capacity, and a design philosophy that allowed failure to be absorbed quickly. The same Panther weaknesses that had appeared at Kursk were still with them in the snow. 18 months of war had identified the disease. Germany had never found a way to stop producing the symptom. Because fixing the Panther properly meant redesigning deeply. Redesigning meant slowing production. Slowing production meant admitting that the impressive machine at the center of German propaganda had been built on a weakness the front had been paying for in steel and blood. So the line kept moving, and the failures kept moving with it. This is the part people miss when they ask which tank was better. Better at what? At killing from long range under favorable conditions, at surviving a frontal hit, at impressing officials on a proving ground, or at being present on the worst morning of the campaign. When the roads are mud, the mechanic has not slept, the crew is new, the spare part came from another factory, and the enemy is already moving. The Sherman was not the answer to every tactical problem. Crews died in them. Their armor could be penetrated. Their early gun was not always enough. Veterans had every right to hate the machine that carried them into fire. But war at scale is not judged by the comfort of a comparison chart. It is judged by what remains available after weeks of punishment. And by that measure, the Sherman was not mediocre. It was merciless. Merciless because it made loss survivable for the army that owned it. Merciless because it turned production into pressure. Merciless because every German success against a Sherman had to be repeated again, and again, and again, while the American system replaced what the battlefield consumed. Near the end, Kummersdorf itself became a symbol of the reversal. The proving ground where German engineers had once studied War Daddy II as a captured curiosity was threatened by the Soviet advance. In the chaos, German personnel gathered whatever vehicles still moved. Among the improvised defenders were American Shermans. Think about that image. German crews climbing into American tanks to help defend the German proving ground, where German engineers had once measured American inferiority. The war that began with panzers crossing borders in perfect columns was ending with Germany relying on captured examples of the industrial philosophy it had dismissed. That is not just defeat. That is an argument closing. Warner's report had not said the Sherman was beautiful. It had not said the gun was superior. It had not said American design solved every battlefield problem. It said in effect that the vehicle belonged to a system Germany could not match. A system of factories that could build interchangeable machines. A system of mechanics that could repair them. A system of spare parts that moved with the army. A system of design choices that favored forgiveness over perfection. The Germans had built extraordinary tanks, but too often those tanks demanded extraordinary conditions to stay extraordinary. The Americans built a tank ordinary enough to be made by the tens of thousands and robust enough to keep showing up. And showing up in war becomes a form of power. After 1945, the lesson did not disappear. Sherman served long after the country that mocked them had surrendered. They were rebuilt, rearmed, modified, exported, and driven in wars their designers never imagined. The basic vehicle absorbed changes because it had been built with margins. There was room in the design, room in the maintenance logic, room in the industrial philosophy. That is what Warner had touched with his hands at Kummersdorf. That is what Bachmann's crews felt in the cold streets of Alsace. That is what German maintenance officers saw when their own tanks sat helpless for want of parts, while captured Shermans kept moving under new markings. The Sherman was not a miracle. It was something harder to defeat. A compromise that understood what it was compromising for. A perfect machine that cannot be repaired is perfect only until it breaks. A superior tank that misses the battle because its final drive failed is superior only in theory. A weapon that demands specialists, rare parts, safe depots, and careful conditions may win a demonstration and still lose a campaign. The Sherman won in the space between those truths. It won in parts bins, in field workshops, in factory gauges, in recovery crews dragging hulls out of mud, in the hands of soldiers who did not need the machine to be elegant. They needed it to start. And on the mornings when Germany's finest tanks were waiting for parts that would never arrive, the Sherman started. That was the difference. Not the best tank on paper. The tank that came back.